Okay, perfect. All right, guys. So, as was started out with, yeah, I've been living with CRPS for a little over 2 years, 2.5 years now. I'd shattered my left heel, and they perform an ORIF. That's what it's called, or open rotation internal fixation. To repair that, and one of the screws was sticking out the bottom. And so I had to have a revision, and during that healing process, the wound itself wasn't healing. So my physical therapist recommended that I take my boot off while I was like doing regular stuff, because I couldn't hurt myself. And that's when I noticed my foot starting to turn black. And that was sort of the first sign, but it was always put off as, oh, it's circulation. I then proceeded to have 2 more surgeries. One was a subtalar fusion, and one was a complete reconstruction. And that's when the CRPS really took over. Unfortunately, because I guess it's so unknown, and it's, it took me 18 months to get a diagnosis. And at that point, there's no turning back. About a year ago, I went to pain management, and that was my first taste of sort of the way that pain management is moving. The first sort of thing they want to do is get you away from medication. And in this case, they wanted to first try sympathetic nerve blocks. And my second nerve block spread my CRPS to my entire body from the chest down. Hospitalized for a month with rehab, and so I was released and then entered into this whole spinal cord stimulator world. Basically, it was presented during my first appointment. So as opposed to in the past, I've talked to people in the past who said, 30 years ago, these devices were, the last resort. But in my case, the idea of a spinal cord stimulator was brought up at the first appointment. And so the process had been started, and when my CRPS spread, it was only with incredibly high doses of opiates that I could function. So in my case, a spinal cord stimulator was, a good route. My liver probably couldn't have handled as much medication as I would have needed to function day to day. And so in my case, the spinal cord stimulator was and has been incredibly successful. Just to overview, I have the Boston Scientific Wave Rider with the 32 contact paddle. It is at my T8 and T9, and then I have wires that tunnel to my left hip. I have to charge once a week. But it's, it's pretty low maintenance. The surgery itself is very hard on the body. And then I tried the Sprint system, unsuccessfully. I'll get into that a bit later. And then I immediately went forward with a trial and then implant of a DRG to try and help my left foot, because with the spinal cord stimulator, I feel it basically from the chest down, and it goes down to my toes on my right foot, but my left leg, it only reaches my knee. And back in 2012, I ruptured my L5-S1 and required a laminectomy and discectomy. And so we think that there is some sort of blockage of waves from it reaching my foot. And so I had a DRG placed at the S1 root in hopes that that would help. It's not helping as much as I'd hoped, but part of that is I have a lot of metal hardware and the bone is completely hollowed out. So I've had sort of the whole gamut. I've had great successes. I've had horrible failures. So that experience has sort of shaped my perspective on neuromodulation. And when you go into this whole world of neuromodulation, the biggest thing is fear. You join these support groups because neuromodulation is something that you've never heard of. Most people don't know what a spinal cord stimulator is. And so, I joined the support group because I was scared. And I created the YouTube channel to sort of provide the information that I wish I had when I was going through the process, because it is a process of so many unknowns. Especially with the Sprint system, there was nothing out there with someone providing a first-person experience. It was only what the company put out there. And anything else was, very outdated in terms of first-person perspective. And so from gathering, current events, as most know, there's a huge effort to cut back opioid use and medication use and replace that with these devices. And it's very hard because it's becoming a situation where people don't want these devices, they need these devices. And they're coming to this point of desperation that puts the doctors and the people who are creating this technology at a great advantage and the patient at a great disadvantage. Because if you're told by your doctor, and this is happening, people are going to pain management doctors and they're being told, if you do not try a spinal cord stimulator, I will not help you. I will not give you the option of trying a lower dose of pain medication or something like that. It's gone from last resort to this is the first thing. And so you have these people like myself. When I went to pain management, I was at a point where I could basically only move my head. With pain taking over my body, I could not function. Anything would make me scream. And out of desperation, you want any relief. And so in my case, you'll have people who have these trials and they'll say, I felt amazing. For me, I knew the trial was successful because I could sit up. It's these things these most basic tasks that I couldn't do, that just because I could sit up for 15 minutes, that was a huge win for me. And thankfully, the benefits of the spinal cord stimulator have gone far beyond that. I'm still in a wheelchair because my body is incredibly atrophied, and I had 5 surgeries in the span of 6 months. My body is incredibly weak. My left leg is completely atrophied from not walking in 3 years almost. But so we have these devices, and I wanted to sort of highlight some of the, not so much, well, some are very negative and some are just I wish it could be fixed sort of thing, when it comes to my experience. The first thing, and I've had a huge issue with this with the DRG, is that the motor nerves are getting activated before the DRG can impact the sensory nerves. And so if I try to turn my DRG up because my foot hurts, my leg goes into spasm. I can't get relief because, the spasms are worse than the pain that I am experiencing. And so, and I experienced that as well with the Sprint system. I only experienced motor nerve activation and extreme pain. The procedure itself was incredibly painful. It was posed to me as, and that's another thing, companies in a lot of cases, they're basically promising that this is a cure. Meanwhile, these things are tools. The Sprint especially was posed to me as an answer to all of my leg problems. This would be a quick little thing. We'd put it in your leg for 60 days, and then you'd be wonderful. Did not experience any of that. The procedure itself, though told to me by my doctor that it would be less painful than... I have a lot of scars in my leg from all the surgeries. So he had injected my scars to see if the entrapped nerves would respond to the lidocaine. And they did. And he told me that this procedure would be less painful than that. Well, that was not the case. I was in the OR under inadequate sedation, not given enough local, with a leg that's ravaged with CRPS, and having these, they basically load needles with these leads and put them through my quadricep. I had the dual system, so they did it twice, and I was literally screaming, "Help me," in the OR the entire time. It was very traumatic, not gonna lie. Had night terrors. It's still, any surgery I've had since, and there's been a couple since, it's, been very hard. So like that sort of captures the emotional side. Once you've had a negative experience with one of these, and it could even be the device was successful, a lot of issues are with the doctors themselves, which I know you guys have no control over. But that is definitely something that needs to be, addressed somehow. Another thing that we've discussed is the positionality, especially of the spinal cord stimulator. If I have my spinal cord stimulator high enough that it's above threshold, I can feel the tingling and stuff like that. If I go like this, it'll turn off, or if I swallow, if I'm drinking, it'll turn off. If I go from standing to laying down, the tingling will really ramp up. I've basically found a way to make my spinal cord stimulator at a level where it's basically on the edge of threshold and subthreshold. I don't feel it when I'm sitting or standing or anything, but when I lay down, I feel it in my right leg. Just as a, hey, I'm on. Which is something I don't get with the DRG, because they don't want you to feel the DRG. Basically, for the DRG, they want you to put it to a point where you feel it and then put it down 2 levels. But as I said, I'm having a very hard time finding any way to have it on at any therapeutic level without it causing intense muscle spasms. So that's something we gotta work out. I'm seeing my rep and my neurosurgeon, and we're trying our best. The next 2 are the 2 biggest issues in terms of fear, in terms of just flat out negative implications for patients, and it's broken down into migration and infection. And I'm gonna begin the whole screen share thing, so if you'll bear with me for a second. I would say that migration is the number 1 fear. When it comes to, you guys see that? You guys see what I'm doing? Okay. So this is just an image of before and after pain management. As you can see, the CRPS in my left leg. And this is what my back looks like now, with all the procedures that have been done. I'll go in later. I did have an infection, as you can see the redness in my DRG sites. But the number one fear is migration. If someone sneezes, if someone slightly bends over, if someone even goes by all the rules. When we have these procedures done, the biggest acronym we are given is BLT, bending, lifting, twisting. You do not do those, you do not raise your arms. And so my first taste of migration was when I was told by my neurosurgeon, at 6 weeks you can bend. Well, I bent and felt a pop. And as you can see, there's a thing sticking out of my back. Thankfully, it turned out to be, I guess there's a tube that encases the wires that travel from, you can see my, the paddle, that's where the paddle is, and the wires go straight down there to where my battery is. I had an x-ray that confirmed that it was okay. But I'm not the only one. I would say probably at least once or twice a day you have someone come on to one of the support groups. I've gotten consent from all these people to share their either their text or their pictures. This is a individual who recently had a spinal cord stimulator, and as you can, I'll give you a second to read it, but you can see the amount of fear that is quite common among spinal cord stimulator and all neuromodulation patients. You can see paranoid, the word fear, the word, calling for help. It's very scary because it's so common. And there does appear to be an underreporting of just how often this occurs. I do have some further examples. You can see that on the left, the lead migrated down. On the right, there's an arrow where both leads were originally started, and you can see both went down. Just yesterday, there was an individual who just got her spinal cord stimulator in August, and lead broke. And she is stuck between a rock and a hard place because she can't get an MRI because her device is not MRI compatible, and the doctor wants to do a myelogram. And for chronic pain patients, we don't want something that will cause more pain than we're already in. So it's a very, very difficult situation. And then we have sort of these outliers. This woman, her leads actually migrated down to the battery and entangled. She said that the doctor, she sent me this image of her doctor had taken it in the OR because they had never seen something like it. Like the leads literally going down to the battery and forming this ball. And so as you can imagine, if we're having extreme examples like this, there are a lot of smaller examples that are still having incredible impacts on patients. And the issue is that if you have a migration, you need a revision. And we're sort of told that revisions are almost commonplace, which for a patient, you're getting cut open and you're having to go through this recovery process again and again and again. And, for me with CRPS, I'm not just having surgical pain, I'm having, my CRPS is fighting back too. The next thing is, this was really scary, and this is something I'm glad didn't happen to me when my wires popped, this is paddle migration too. So we're all, I have a paddle because I was, it's like, if you get a paddle, it won't move because you have laminectomy and it's secured. Well, as you can see, the paddle is floating away from the spine. This was probably the scariest. Not again. Sorry. This case was a battery that migrated to a spine. You can see on the left. She did have a revision to move it away from the spine because she was in incredible pain. And the individual on the right had a very similar experience, and actually after a year had the entire system removed because it just it wasn't doing it for her. We get these devices to diminish our pain, not to either leave us where we were, or in some cases people are made worse. As with anything, you always want a positive outcome, but sometimes that doesn't happen. The next is infection. This was my infection. As you saw from the initial picture of my back, there was a lot of redness, and this is why. The top picture on the left, that was my back when I went to have my staples removed. I actually passed out from the pain of that procedure. And in the coming days, it got worse and worse, and as you can see, at the bottom of those three and then to the right, they opened. I had home health come and called the doctor, and it was like no big deal. Finally, he had me come in Monday. He had put me on 2 high doses of antibiotics, and unfortunately, I had a complication on top of the complication because a week after being on these 2 antibiotics, one being Bactrim, which has sulfur, this was me. Happened on Friday morning. I noticed a couple of spots, but I still took my Bactrim pill, and we can see the progression. And all the way on the left, you'll see I was also having a simultaneous adhesive reaction. So it was a very difficult position to be in, and on top of that, my neurosurgeon did not want to treat me for the infection because anti-inflammatories such as prednisone are contraindicated for healing. So I'm trying to battle an infection, but at the same time, I am literally, it felt like I was burning alive. It was a horrible experience. Would not wish it on anyone. But infections are a lot more common than, once again, I think are reported. I was told that 1% of individuals who have these procedures done experience an infection, but that's not what I see. It's not what I experience when I go on to the internet and see my sort of comrades in chronic pain experiencing in the post-op time period. This was an example. This was a young woman. She was in college, and she actually missed her final semester of college due to this infection. Started out as staph and turned into meningitis. So these complications are life-threatening. Infection. Every surgery has the possibility of infection, and I'm thinking it's happening more than they're saying. This could have led to an infection. Thank God it did not. It led to emergency surgery. But this individual had a bubble on her back after surgery, and she had reported it to her doctor, and it was constantly put off as it's nothing. She bent over one day and felt something wet dripping down her back, and that was spinal fluid. And as you can see, I underlined the lead wire popped through my skin. So she went to the hospital and underwent emergency surgery. in order to hopefully, prevent infection, which it did. So we have all these complications, and I'm gonna go back to showing you my face now. End the screen share, if I can do that. Stop broadcasting. Okay. And we got the camera. Okay. So as you can see from the images and all that stuff, big thing with neuromodulation is fear. And if you want more individuals to be open to trying these devices and basically not hating them, especially because they're being basically shoved in everyone's face. To be blunt, you need to reduce the fear, and to reduce a lot of the things that people are complaining about. And one big issue that I'm finding is a lack of transparency when it comes to the companies and the patients. As I noted with the Sprint system, it was sold to me as a cure. Told that it would not hurt. I was told that it would be in for 60 days and could provide long-term relief. Okay? I ended up speaking with someone from the company afterwards because I was so unhappy with the experience. And I told him, you need to define long-term. I'm not even 30 years old. And it turns out that by long-term, they meant that the longest, and my rep said this, the longest she's seen, I think, was 8 years of relief. But for the most part, the people I spoke to who had experienced a positive outcome got 6 months of relief. That's not long-term. One of the individuals who came to me, she messaged me and she said it was a success. And now I'm looking into getting a spinal cord stimulator and a DRG. I'm like, that's not a success. That's a maybe time, holding you off on the pain until you can get the other stuff, but that is certainly not a cure, not a long-term thing by any stretch of the imagination. And one big issue that I am told, sorry, dog with squeaky toy, that I was told, Nala, stop. I'm sorry. Something I was told only happens in 1% of patients, and then was told by the higher up individual at Sprint that it happens in 3% of patients. I myself, when I had the device removed, I permanently have a piece of it with me because the lead broke off inside of my leg. The doctor was very aggressive with the removal, which I think partially contributed to the breaking off. But these leads, they are coiled to prevent migration. And I think it's a little ironic that the leads that people are getting that are supposed to be lasting, for the duration of the battery life, before, things are replaced, they're not coiled. But these things are so that they don't move. And so you're putting something so that it's really, really hard to remove for a short period of time, but then for a long period of time you have these leads that are moving, if someone sneezes. So I think that's one thing to consider is possibly looking at the way that the Sprint leads are created and possibly finding an even stronger way for them to hold in place. Because the sprint was really hard to get out. And I do have a friend who also had his sprint removed from his neck last week, and part of the lead broke off. So, I think it's a little interesting that I'm being told that, it doesn't happen that much. But, 2 for 2 is pretty, the odds of that I think are pretty, interesting. And so I think that one way that we can reduce the fear, hence getting more people on board with these devices, is through transparency and accurate statistics. We need accurate reporting, accurate statistics, so people know what they are going into. Because there's always fear with the unknown, That's why I made the channel, because I was afraid, but I had no one to turn to. So at least now, people have a place to turn to. Another thing that I think would be super helpful for, especially, the individual from yesterday who was saying that, she can't get an MRI because her system's not MRI compatible. If there was a way to make all of these devices with all of their parts MRI compatible, that would be a wonderful thing, because, the level of radiation that you experience with a CAT scan, especially a lot of the people getting these devices have neuropathic pain related quite commonly to spinal issues, and a lot of them do have spinal issues in general. And so they need, in a lot of cases, frequent scans and whatnot. So that is something that needs to be, I guess, looked at. And the final thing that I thought would be very, I guess, helpful in terms of allaying patient fears would be having a way for the leads and battery to have almost like a sensor on them, so that, let's say a lead did migrate, because there's that constant fear. Okay, did it move? I sneezed, I bent, I did this. If the controller said, okay, your battery moved, okay, your lead moved, then okay, I need to call my doctor. But if nothing goes off, then okay, I'm fine. And so I think that would be another really good thing to incorporate. And one thing that I looked into, I called each of my reps and I said, how are we to know when the battery is dying? Because we're given a range of years. And I was very happy to hear that as far as my DRG, because I'm told that it has a 15-year battery life. And my rep said that my remote, which is an iPod, would actually indicate when the battery was down to, say, 20%. And so I would have the time to get it replaced. Because as I mentioned in the beginning, these aren't cures, they're tools. And as I experienced when I had my DRG trial, I had to turn off my spinal cord stimulator. Like that, crippled. Like I could barely crawl from the wheelchair to the OR table. Like that is how much of an impact having my device off had on my body. And so I wanted to make sure that, because in most cases it takes like a month to get in for surgery for anything, unless it's an emergency. So I was happy to hear that. And then when I spoke to my rep through Boston Scientific, he said that, it was more of an ambiguous thing, but you would just notice it wasn't holding the charge as long as it had been in the past. And from that time, you'd have good, probably 6 months. So the last thing I wanted to sort of pose, I'm going to screen share. Oopsie. Screen share one more time. Share screen. Start broadcast. Okay, I think we're good. Correct. Okay. So we have the knowledge that any surgery leads to infection. And a lot of the complications that I discussed, especially the migration of several moving parts and infection leads to surgery, and more surgery leads to more possibility of infections. So by improving these devices, by making it so they last longer, by making it so that the parts move less and we need fewer revisions, because revisions are too commonplace. People say, you know, I'm having my revision. In term, like, it's as almost like they're saying, I'm getting my spinal cord stimulator. I'm having my revision. There's very few people I've spoken to who have had their simulators for a long period of time and not needed a revision. And so for patients, peace of mind and quality of life and all that, you know, the fewer surgeries the better, because people are getting these for chronic pain. And fewer surgeries, fewer infections. I don't know if you guys saw the CDC article that it was like over 400 people have died getting these stimulators in the last like 5 years. So, you know, in certain cases, you know, this is life and death. And not something to be taken lightly, you know. You know, it's very hard, you know, forming relationships with individuals in these groups. And one woman went in to get her spinal cord stimulator, and a few days later to get an update from a family member saying that they're on a ventilator because they, in search of pain, developed a complication, acute respiratory distress syndrome. But, you know, people are literally dying to get pain relief. They're willing to risk their lives because life in this much pain is almost unlivable, you know? When I was first diagnosed with CRPS, you know, I looked it up and they called it the suicide syndrome, the suicide disease. And I was like, what does that mean? And, you know, I understand it now that, you know, especially once it's spread and your entire body feels like it is just gonna explode and you're in, you know, 20 out of 10 pain, 24/7, you know, the spinal cord stimulator was my last option. And I am thankful every day that it has worked. And even if the DRG doesn't work as well as I want it to, I understand that it's newer technology, and I hope that as time passes and there's more competition, because Abbott is the only company putting it out, I really hope there are improvements. And, you know, I want things to be better, not just for me, but for people, you know, for everyone. You know, this impacts me greater because I definitely am on the younger side. You know, I have a lifetime of pain to try to stave off. And that's very scary. But I feel like I'm sort of in a position where, you know, I can at least try to sculpt my future a bit, you know, try to make things better, because I'm literally helping myself and helping future chronic pain patients to have a better experience than others have had, to have a better experience than I've had. And yeah, I guess that about sums it up. I hope you found that interesting. I don't know.
Thank you, Jen.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do this like one person clap for the room. Alright, so now let's have some questions for Jen. She's very open to any questions that I've asked, and I asked a lot of tough questions, so I would say go for it.
So I'll start. To introduce myself, I'm Kip Ludwig. I'm a co-director of the Wisconsin Institute for Translational Neural Engineering. Thank you so much for having this conversation with us. We're a training institution, and so most of these people have not worked in the industry. I actually did work in the neuromodulation industry, and it's difficult to convey. We get data from industry and from surgeons on the prevalence of these things. And me coming from industry, I know it's a rosier picture than what's out there.
Yeah.
So it's incredibly helpful for us to get that perspective of the not only just the prevalence of these things, but how it's being communicated and the real impact on the people who have to go through these things. Surgeons talk about a revision in almost off, or some of them do, some of them don't, to be fair. But some of them talk about it in a trivial fashion. It's never trivial to the person undergoing the surgery. In terms of this miscommunication, where you're presenting a different picture than what was presented to you in terms of likelihood of these things before you got each of these procedures. Where do you think the major points of this miscommunication are? Do you think it's on the industry side? Do you think it's on the surgeon side? Do you think it's both?
I think it's both. Because I guess, I've come to learn that there's, in some instances, a conflict of interest between surgeons and the companies they work with financially. But I think the big thing is people feel connected to their rep. They feel like there's this relationship where they've built this trust. And so while I think the doctors have a role to play, certainly, my surgeon has only ever said 1%, and that's about it. I think the reps should be conveying the information because they know it with their, because every company has their own device. And so one company may have, fewer instances of migration. So I think it's more of a company rep sort of thing that they convey this information. But at the same time, I think the surgeons need to do a better job of, for lack of a better word, caring about what the patient is experiencing. Because I noticed, both with my infection and allergic reaction, it felt like they didn't care. I spent, I developed that allergic reaction on a Friday morning. My surgeon was in the office. I had a home health nurse call saying this kid's temperature is up, her blood pressure's through the roof, she has a fever, she has all this stuff. By lunchtime, there was blistering around my incisions. The reaction had spread all the way to my face. And I called the office, was sending pictures, and the surgeon said, well, I want to see your incision, but he wouldn't see me till Monday. I said, I will travel to the hospital you're associated with. I am dying here. And that weekend, I must have called the on-call doctor probably a dozen times. That weekend, my mom had to perform hourly checks to make sure my airway didn't close. Because I went to the hospital that Friday, was told it didn't matter what hospital I went to, and after 5 hours, my mom called the doctor's office. And they called and said, don't treat her with prednisone. Don't treat her with the only thing that will make life somewhat handleable for this weekend. So I literally spent that weekend burning alive. like as you can see from skin, like from head to toe. And I literally, if I could have been on my hands and knees begging for help, I would have. And you know, I go to the office Monday morning. He says my incisions look great. He says, I don't know that it's the Bactrim. I don't know that it's the sulfur. It should be out of your system. It's not my expertise. Go to your general practitioner. That's unacceptable. Unacceptable. You know, I will not give names, but he is, you know, touted as one of the top. If that's the top, I don't want to see the bottom. So that's the kind of patient care that we are receiving, in more common than anything. We're being treated worse than the animals that you guys are experimenting on, and like without exaggeration. Everyone I've talked to is like, we need a voice because we're being treated so badly. Because we're at this point of desperation, these doctors think that they can do anything because we have no choice. If they won't sign a script and we're, you know, basically unable to function, then we have no choice but to go ahead and let them do what they want. And it's a horrible position to be in. So I think statistic-wise and stuff, that needs to come from the company, or for the company to, you know, convey that information to the doctors. But I really think that the pain management doctors and the neurosurgeons, I think they need to step up, because neuromodulation is a much worse experience than it needs to be. You know, we get these devices to improve our lives, but if in the process our lives are made worse, or if the journey to getting the device is one like I experienced with the DRG, you know, you always, you know, does the end justify the means sort of deal, you know? So yeah, I hope that answered.
That helps, thank you. Are there other questions?
Yeah. Hi, Jen. Oh, sorry. Somebody else. Is it? Sorry about that. I was just, thanks a lot for sharing your experience. That was definitely eye-opening. I did not realize, I guess, some of this. I actually